Good afternoon, y'all. The time is now 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and jump straight in. There may be some folks hopping in over the next few minutes, so we'll be moving kind of slow in the beginning just to make sure that everybody's gotten in safely and is on the same page. But welcome to the first Tarrant County Unity Council Housing Committee meeting, and I believe it's the first committee meeting in general, so I guess we're all the guinea pigs, so y'all be nice. Hopefully everybody participates. My name is Kylie Brooks. I'm a health equity specialist with Tarrant County Public Health. I'm responsible for housing equity and newly assigned to economic development as well. And I'll be providing backup for health equity and internal policy review within Tarrant County Public Health. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to share your expertise in housing and the factors that drive housing inequities. We'll be doing some exciting work in this committee, and it is truly an honor to have some of the brightest minds here today, and hopefully some more bright minds coming in over the next few minutes. So the housing committee meetings will be largely discussion based. Although this meeting will be mostly me talking, future meetings will rely on dialogue and the sharing of ideas and best practices. You guys are the ones out in the field doing this work on a daily basis, or you might have an equity plan of your own. So this committee is going to be a melting pot of all of our experiences and ideas. Since we are still bound to virtual meetings, the best face-to-face experience we have is unfortunately through our cameras. So mine will remain on during all of our meetings, and I would kindly ask you to do the same whenever possible if you're capable of doing so. Tanya and I will be doing our best to monitor the chat during the meeting, but please feel free to unmute yourself at any time. The floor is yours whenever you want it or whenever you need it. So the purpose of the Housing Committee is to develop and promote housing equity in Tarrant County through policy recommendation and implementation. And this committee will work to identify solutions to the most pressing housing concerns and turn our recommendations into an equity plan. We'll be reviewing an equity plan later in this meeting very briefly. We'll go into it more in depth so that we can start thinking about the direction of our future meetings. Some of the most important work that will happen in this committee, though, will be engaging our actual community. So we'll talk a bit more about what that may look like later in the meeting. And again, we'll go more in depth as we progress through these committee meetings in the next few months. The housing committee meetings are scheduled right now for the second Wednesday of every month at 2 p.m. If there's a better day of the week or time of the day that works better for you guys, please let me know. We can change that pretty easily. There may be a few months where we meet more than once, or I send out an email as a supplement to our meeting, but that will likely be quite a bit down the line. And as with all TCUC meetings and functions, if you're unable to attend, please send a representative on your behalf. We want to make sure that your voice is heard and that you can stay connected even when life gets busy, because we all know that it does. Now that we're in a more intimate setting, I'd like to go around and quickly introduce ourselves. So if you wouldn't mind, please share your name, title, organization, and why you're interested in making housing more equitable in Tarrant County. I promise we won't do this every time, just the first time, so we can all get a little bit familiar with each other. Tanya, she is my backup in housing, so we are going to start with her.
Hi, thank you. Hi, my name is Tanya Till. I am assisting Miss Kylie with housing. I'm also a health equity specialist here, and my primary focus is health. However, housing is just as important to all of our health because our environment has a lot to do with our health. So, with that being said, collabing with Kylie, we just want the best for everybody, and that's the goal here. So I look forward to meeting and working with each and every last one of you guys. Thank you.
Nikos?
Hi, my name is Nikos Elzy. I am a health equity specialist with Tarrant County Public Health, and I'm here to support Kylie in her endeavors to um, create an equity plan for housing. And I'm interested in working with this committee because um, having my fair share of experience with housing and equity, I feel like I do have some things I can contribute to what's missing and what could be done to make it better for those who have found themselves in similar situations such as myself. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tanisha Stanford. I'm also a health equity specialist here with Tarrant County Public Health. My focus is communication as well as education. And I'm here, one, more than anything, as a support to Kylie, but also interested in housing, just because I've lived in a lot of different communities, a couple of different states and cities, and I've just seen a lot of, housing inequities. And so I would love to just see how, we can make a change in Tarrant County, and maybe how I can share some of this information to some of my friends and, the various communities that I've been involved with. Thank you.
My name is Barbara Young. I'm a health equity specialist here with TCPH. My focus will be internal with TCPH, and I'm here to support my coworker, Kylie Brooks.
I don't know if we have a specific order. I'll go next. I'm Mindy Cochran. I'm the Executive Director of Housing for the City of Arlington. In Arlington, housing, my role incorporates not only the Housing Authority, but also a lot of housing related grants that come through our grants department, as well as working with our Housing Finance Corporation. I've been involved in a lot of the unity efforts with our city council that they undertook this past year. And so I'm interested in ideas that are working in other communities throughout our county.
All right, I'll jump in. Hi, friends. It's Maggie Jones with Tarrant County Community Development, and I'm super pumped to see so many familiar names on this call. I'm really excited about it. I'm super excited that Tarrant County has been looking at things through an equity lens, especially as it relates to housing and community development. And I'm really pumped to be talking and having some of those hard conversations and thinking about how we can advance economic mobility in our community. So thanks so much. This is great.
Hi, this is Michelle Kennedy. I'm going to jump into the conversation as well. I'm with Habitat for Humanity. I'm incredibly interested in this conversation because we have seen families moving from substandard housing and the health problems that have been caused within the families because of the quality of housing. And we've seen the disproportionate impact on low-income communities and communities of color. And so we're incredibly interested in anything that would promote diversity in this discussion. So I'm interested in being a part of this for that reason. Also, this is the third invitation of a group such as this happening locally that I have been invited to participate in. So it's an obviously a buzzword and something that a lot of different groups are wanting to discuss. So I'm intrigued. Thanks for the invite.
Well, I don't know if it's me up next because I can't see the names. I'm Pierre Gann. I'm the community liaison with the Mayor Group Star Plus program. And like many of us all have mentioned before, it's a focal point of all of our endeavors, especially with the social determinants of health to our members that are on Medicaid or the general population that we serve. I'm interested and I'm glad for the invite. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Donna Van Ness. I'm president of Housing Channel. We are excited to participate in this council. We've, for 30 years, served the Tarrant County and greater Dallas-Fort Worth area with housing counseling and education. We're also working with different jurisdictions and cities on down payment assistance programs for low to moderate income families, and also with development of affordable housing as much as we can. And obviously, in this highly competitive market, we're very interested on on how to maintain housing affordability and continue providing services and quality housing to help people build wealth through homeownership. So thank you for the invitation.
Hey everyone, this is Marcus Morris at First Financial Bank in Fort Worth, and excited to be a part of the team. We have had a focus on housing and the role that the bank plays. Over the last year or so, we've really been focused on creating new programs, focus on underserved pockets within Tarrant County. And sometimes that can be from our lens, so it's important for me to hear from others in the community truly what those groups are and why their situation might be different, so that we can better tailor the products we have to truly meet the housing needs that are out there.
Perfect. Well, I think that was most people. Feel free, if you weren't able to hop on or if your mic wasn't working, to drop your information in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourselves and what brought you here today. I'm hoping that we can, pool all of our brain power together and really make something sustainable. So we're always looking to add, as I was just saying, more brain power to this committee. So if you know of anyone who may be interested in participating in these committee meetings, please invite them. You can forward my calendar invite directly. You can give them my contact information, or you can give me their contact information, whatever way works best for you. We just want more people from more walks of life, more backgrounds here with us. All right, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes. I will say, though, it's only fitting that our first housing committee meeting is happening during Fair Housing Month, right? So before we dive too deep into the true history of inequitable housing, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the true weight of Fair Housing Month. So April is National Fair Housing Month, which celebrates the passage of the Fair Housing Act, which was part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. The Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination in renting or buying a home, applying for and receiving a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, and utilizing subsidized housing based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, gender, familial status, ability, pretty much all reasons that we can think of. Prior to the passage of the Fair Housing Act, real estate professionals, builders, developers, financial institutions, they could all deny housing opportunities based on all of those factors that we had just listed above. In fact, the National Housing Act of 1934 actually encouraged discriminatory housing practices, which I'm sure you're all aware of. The Federal Housing Administration Manual explicitly stated that making loans to predominantly Black areas was risky. Federal reinforcement of housing segregation and discrimination drew distinct and long-lasting lines between Black and white neighborhoods that still exist today. Some of these barriers looked like walls and highways separating neighborhoods, and they were, again, carefully and deliberately engineered to prevent people of color from job and education opportunities in large cities. And although the Fair Housing Act was the first step in making discriminatory housing practices illegal, there is still plenty of work to be done. We have just scratched the surface with most of this. Fair Housing Month serves as a reminder to support and build thriving, inclusive, and equitable communities. And we're going to be talking a lot about the history of inequitable housing today, but of course, our history is very long, it's very dense, and it's very important that we all understand it, but we can't cover it in one single meeting. So for a detailed picture of the impact of discriminatory legislature, I would highly recommend the book The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. It looks like this. I will say I have not finished it yet. I have made a good dent in it, and it's been really wonderful so far. Rothstein details the full history of discriminatory practices at local, state, and national levels, and he provides clear answers to the lack of opportunity in housing, economic mobility, education, and employment that people of color, specifically African Americans, have experienced. Okay, so we're going to cover quite a bit of legislature in here. We're first going to talk about the National Housing Act of 1934, which, as I had just mentioned, was the first and largest, most discriminatory piece of legislature that's on record. The National Housing Act of 1934 was part of President Roosevelt's New Deal. It was a home buying aid that was established to stimulate the economy during the Great Depression. Up until this point, the federal government had not been involved in housing in pretty much any capacity. This act provided federal loan backing, which guaranteed mortgages and thus promoted homeownership. Following its passage, the Federal Housing Administration was passed. The FHA limited its federal loan backing assistance to white buyers, and the manual explicitly stated, again, that it was risky to make mortgage loans in predominantly Black areas, which was a practice called redlining. And the term redlining originated with the National Housing Act of 1934, as financial institutions and the FHA would draw literal red lines on maps to identify hazardous areas or heavily populated by people of color. These exclusionary zoning laws are basically what we see here in this picture. The federal reinforcement of housing segregation and discrimination drew distinct and long-lasting lines between Black and white neighborhoods. These exclusionary zoning laws are, to this day, some of the clearest examples of institutionalized racism. Builders and developers would use barriers like walls and highways to separate neighborhoods and would carefully and deliberately engineer these cities to prevent people of color from job and education opportunities. And as I said, these dividers are just as obvious today as they were back in the mid 1900s and the Great Depression when these were enacted. Residential security maps, like the one pictured here, are products of the FHA's underwriting handbook, which was used by the Homeowners Loan Corporation from 1934 up until the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. These maps were created for cities with populations of 40,000 people or more. The maps color-coded which neighborhoods would make secure investments and which should be off limits based on those who inhabited them. These maps, coded in green, blue, yellow, and red zones, helped the government decide which properties were eligible for federally subsidized loans. The green areas were considered best. They were in demand, up-and-coming neighborhoods where professional men lived, and there were no Black people whatsoever. In the blue areas, they were still considered desirable. Neighborhoods had reached their peak, but it was still stable due to the low risk of infiltration of non-whites. In the yellow areas, these were considered declining. They were typically bordering Black neighborhoods, and they were considered risky due to the threat of infiltration of lower grade populations. And the red zones were hazardous. Infiltration had already occurred. Almost all neighborhoods populated by Black people and described as having an undesirable population. They were ineligible for federal backing, and you can see that a lot of these areas that are marked in red are still areas where people are experiencing the heaviest housing inequities to this day. In 1973, President Nixon declared a moratorium on subsidized housing and community development assistance, which included subsidized programs for homeownership, rental and cooperative housing, rent supplements, low rent public housing, and college housing. Although the moratorium was declared unlawful by a federal judge only a few months after its implementation, it did remain in effect until the end of September of 1973, so a full 9 months. These programs primarily served vulnerable populations and people of color. A present-day example of discriminatory housing legislature is in the housing assessment prioritization. There's a tool called the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. It's a very long name, VISPDAT. It is a survey administered to individuals and families to determine risk and prioritization when providing federal assistance to those experiencing homelessness and those at risk of homelessness. People of color are often prioritized lower than whites, and whites are often prioritized higher than people of color for permanent supportive housing resources. Why? Because many of the questions asked in the tool are tilted and skewed towards capturing vulnerabilities that only white people experience. Long-term impact. We can see most of this Maggie says, holy goodness gracious, yes. This one's a heavy one. I probably should have given a warning at the beginning, so I do apologize for that. But it is important that we know the full history and the reason why all of these inequities are still existing today. So that leads right into the long-term impact. Gentrification. Gentrification is the process by which higher income households displace lower income residents of a neighborhood, which basically changes the neighborhood's character and unique flavor. These changes include social dynamics, land use transformation, new developments, but all of these things are unaffordable and they don't really serve the needs of the original residents. These changes caused by gentrification often result in barriers to resources. Some projects, under the guise of revitalization, were intentionally used to displace and disempower targeted communities, which were people of color, seniors, people who have different ability levels, and economically disadvantaged groups. Some of the most obvious instances of gentrification can be seen on Main Street in near South Side, in the stockyards here in Fort Worth, and in the immediate areas near AT&T Stadium, Texas Live, and Globe Life Field. This map here depicts low-income displacement and concentration in the Tarrant County census tracts from 2000 to 2016. These colors represent the net change in number of low-income persons within the census tracts. So these blue shaded areas, the blue signifies a reduction in low-income persons, and red and brown shading signifies an increase in low-income persons. So the areas in blue describe gentrification. So the blue zip codes that are listed here are 76020, 76102, 76104, 76105, 76110, 76117, 76119, 76129, and 76132, which is a lot of zip codes. And if you go in those areas, if you're from the area and you've sort of seen these areas transform over time, it'll be very obvious. There's also present day redlining. Neighborhoods that were labeled as yellow and red by that FHA handbook are still underdeveloped and underserved. In these areas live the highest rates of building vacancies, empty blocks, poor economic outcomes. These places lack basic services like healthcare, internet, banks, and fresh foods, and it's very difficult to find jobs and transportation. These lacks of resources have led to inconceivable health and wealth outcome gaps. As a direct result of the National Housing Act, Black Americans have not had the opportunity or ability to gain equity in their homesteads. According to the real estate app Redfin, Black families have lost out on at least $212,000 in personal wealth over the last 40 years because their home was redlined. As we well know, in this COVID-19 area, which is why we're doing this project as part of a COVID grant, homes are still unaffordable to many. Black families have had the largest disadvantage due to these continued forms of institutionalized housing discrimination. Up next, we're going to look into some gaps in wealth and homeownership. The gap in racial homeownership is larger today than it was when it was literally legal to refuse or to sell or provide a loan for a home to someone because of the color of their skin or where they were born. Not a single United States city has closed this gap to this day, and it is 2022. As we have seen with COVID-19, this homeownership gap widens during economic crises and sudden disasters because people of color, again, are disproportionately impacted by these crises, often due to the structural and systemic barriers that they've faced for their entirety. Since homeownership remains the principal way in which most families build wealth, it's not surprising that Black wealth is about 5% of white wealth and Black incomes are about 60% of white incomes. The image here illustrates the homeownership gap in the DFW and Arlington Metroplex. It's not exactly Tarrant County, so do take some of this information with a grain of salt. The white homeownership rate from this point in 2018 was 69%, and the Black homeownership rate was 37%, creating a homeownership gap of nearly 32%. In 2021, the national homeownership gap was 31.3%. And again, that's a national number. Local numbers have not been made available yet, but I will be checking pretty frequently because they should be coming out soon. Data for 2022 is not yet available, though it is fair to assume the gap has not closed at any significant rate. The Urban Institute, the ones who made this lovely map over here, identified 5 key variables that drive this homeownership gap, which include a lower median household income, educational attainment. Black households with a bachelor degree are actually less likely to own a home than white households without a high school diploma. As well, a lower credit score, marital status, and age distribution. The Urban Institute has also developed a 5-point framework to reduce this homeownership gap, which can be applied to most of this work that the committee will do, utilizing fair housing, fair lending, and technology as foundations for success. It also provides a clear direction of how to allocate resources and how to collaboratively work to reduce housing disparities. First, the Urban Institute recommends tackling housing supply constraints and affordability. It also recommends the promotion of an equitable and accessible housing finance system. And a side note, as you can probably see, these are not easy fixes and will require lots of time, effort, and tenacity to accomplish them. The Urban Institute also recommends accelerating outreach and counseling for renters and mortgage-ready populations with specific focus on younger generations and first-time homebuyers. Focus on sustainable homeownership and the preservation of homesteads and neighborhoods. Lastly, the Urban Institute recommends advancing policy solutions at the local level. Policy, as we will come to see, will be the best and most sustainable option for us to make real and lasting change. There is some good news. There have been some advancements in legislature over the years since 1968. So again, April is Fair Housing Month. It celebrates the passage of the Fair Housing Act. As I had described, it put an end to the federal housing discrimination as America had known up to that point in time. As part of that Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act prohibited discrimination in renting or buying a home, applying for and receiving a mortgage, seeking housing assistance, using federally subsidized housing based on race, color, origin, religion, all those identifiers. What's more, banks could no longer discriminatorily deny loans or other financial assistance for the purpose of improving, repairing, or maintaining a dwelling against a loan applicant or the people associated with them. The Fair Housing Act's banking provisions apply to the accessibility and rates of home equity and home purchase loans, which includes the secondary market practices. So the Fair Housing Act was a huge leap forwards. Not too long following, in 1969, the Brooke Amendment was enacted as part of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1969. It capped public housing tenant rent contribution at 25% of the household's total income. Prior to the Brooke Amendment, there were no restrictions on rent contributions in public housing options, especially not for families with a household income significantly lower than the AMI. The economic and social climate resulted in public housing serving the poorest of the poor, those who typically received multiple sources of federal assistance. The cap was later raised to 30% via the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1981, which was marked by a trend of withdrawing from and severely limiting public housing. The Brooke Amendment was a step in the right direction, but the inevitable lack of funding for public housing authorities and the end of public housing developments led to a really fast decline in both the quality and availability of units for those who needed them most. Then in 1977 was the Community Reinvestment Act. Again, you guys, I apologize. The stuff is dense, but we got to know it. The Community Reinvestment Act of 1977 encouraged financial institutions to meet the credit needs of their communities, focusing on low and moderate income borrowers in geographic areas, small businesses, small farms. Perhaps the most important component of the Act is the regulatory assessment process for financial institutions of all sizes and all environments. Financial institutions were required to include data for whole census tracts. Bank main offices, branches, deposit-taking ATMs, any areas where the bank lived, they finally had to report all that information back to the HUD. Then, in 1987, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness was created with the sole mission of preventing and ending homelessness in America. The USICH works across all levels of government and in the private sector to create partnerships within the communities, but they also want to make sure that resources are being used efficiently and effectively and employ evidence-based best practices, which is also what we're trying to do here. According to their website, the USICH values racial equity, housing first interventions, decriminalization of homelessness, because experiencing homelessness does not make someone a criminal, and inclusion. Since the organization's first strategic plan was published about 10 years ago, the USICH has seen a 9% overall decline in homelessness, a 30% decrease among families, and a 50% decrease among veterans. Tanya will be providing a link in the chat to their 2018 strategic plan called Home Together, which includes a timeline through the end of the 2022 calendar year. They should be releasing their next 4-year increment set of goals and strategic plan here in the next few months. Okay, we've made it through most of the history. We are now moving on to data, which is my personal favorite. I did have to pick and choose, so if there's anything that I miss here today that you'd like to see more of, please drop it in the chat and I'll make sure to include it in our next meeting. So in the following data sets, we'll be concentrating on 3 main areas of interest. We're going to look at affordability, accessibility, and homelessness. The data that we're looking at, some of it will be national, some of it will be local, but all of it is important to the work that we're doing. So this graphic is from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it shows the total hours working at minimum wage needed to afford a 1-bedroom rental home at fair market rent. The data is broken down by county, and Tarrant County requires, as you can see with the very dark blue, over 80 hours per week to afford a 1-bedroom rental home at fair market rent. In the state of Texas, to afford a 2-bedroom rental home at fair market rent, an hourly rate of $21.98 is required, which is quite a bit higher than the minimum wage. From the Urban Institute, this figure details the home mortgage loan denial rates by race and ethnicity in the government channel. In 2016, whites experienced a denial rate of 22%, while people of color experienced an average denial rate of 29%, with blacks experiencing the highest denial rates. This figure is a perfect example of the lasting impacts of that discriminatory legislature and the lack of generational wealth that it had caused. This data is from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2020 Annual Homeless Assessment Report to Congress. A total of 580,446 people were experiencing homelessness on one single night in January 2020. These PITs are point-in-time counts where they pick one night, usually in the last 10 days of January, to go out and count all of the people who are experiencing homelessness, whether sheltered or unsheltered. For this January 2020 number, less than 1% of people experiencing homelessness were children under the age of 18 without an adult present. And although African Americans comprise 13% of the population, they accounted for, again, January 2020, they accounted for 40% of the homeless population in that point in time count, totaling 228,796 people. So we're going to look at affordability on a local level. This figure, is from the National Equity Atlas, and it depicts the rental housing burden by race. The orange color signifies Tarrant County, and the gray signifies the United States. African Americans report experiencing the heaviest burden at 54%, and people of color in general report experiencing a housing burden of 50%. Even for homeowners, housing burden is highest in African Americans and people of color at 27% and 24% respectively. We know that the government, through that Omnibus Act, had set the subsidized housing tenant contributions at 30%, and these are nearly double that, and that is very clearly a result of this discriminatory legislature. I'm sure Maggie is familiar with this graphic. It's an excerpt from the Tarrant County Community Development and Housing Department's 2020 to 2024 Consolidated Plan, detailing the types and percentages of loan applications. So this is going to be a direct quote. In 2018, 70,891 applications were received by financial lenders for FHA, FSA, RHS, VA, conventional, refinancing, and home improvement loans. 41% of applications received were for conventional home loans, 33% for refinancing, 18% for FHA, FSA, RHS, and VA loans, with only 8% for home improvement loans. Although only 5,646 applications for home improvement loans were received, half of the applications were denied by the lenders compared to 8% denial rate for conventional FHA, it's a lot of acronyms, sorry, FSA, RHS, and VA loans. There were no reasons listed amongst the data, but reasons could range from not enough equity, low financial scores, asking for an amount greater than the home is worth, or where return on investment is minimal. So as you can see in this figure, the majority of home loan applicants were white. However, whites at all income levels had the lowest denial rates. Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders actually had the highest denial rates across the board, but accounted for less than 1% of loan applications. Similarly, American Indian or Alaskan Natives had high denial rates, not quite as high as Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, but certainly close, and they only accounted for 1% of all applications. Tanya is going to be providing a link to that 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan in the chat, as it has some of the most up-to-date data as it relates to housing access and affordability in Tarrant County specifically. Homelessness at the local level. This figure is from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and it details the rates and changes in homelessness in Tarrant County in 2020. Since 2007, the unsheltered population has increased by 300%, while the sheltered population has decreased by 51%. Overall, though, there has been a 26% decrease in homelessness in Tarrant County. So while homelessness has decreased, there is still plenty of work to be done. Okay, we're going to take just a second to have a discussion. What facets of housing are most important to you, especially after hearing the outcomes of years and decades of discriminatory housing legislature?
Addressing the redlining aspect and gentrification. This is Pierre speaking.
This is Maggie Jones. From a community development standpoint, I think it's also important to make sure that the future HUD investments that we have been graciously awarded the ability to make sure that we're putting those in the right spot. A lot of times when we build, we're building because it's easy or because a developer can do it in a specific place. And we need to make sure that we are looking at it through an equity lens so that we can make sure that we have the most positive impact for our investments so that we can stop doing what we have been doing.
Y'all are totally right. And Maggie, I love your passion. I'm really excited to take what you guys have said and turn it into something great. If you think of anything else that's really important to you personally, please do let me know. I had picked the three: affordability, accessibility, and homelessness as my topics of concern, but we will definitely be adding those other two that you guys have mentioned. Next up, how does housing impact the day-to-day lives of the communities that your organization serves? Maggie says every single day. Very true.
Yeah, I think like, because it really does tie to everything. So location truly matters. So it might mean that you're driving further for a job. It might mean that you don't have a way to get groceries home. It might mean that you don't have public transportation. It might mean that you don't have childcare near you. And so it means that access is impacted, and therefore your opportunity for changing your situation is also impacted.
This is Mindy. I think there's just so many facets. Maggie and I were at a session yesterday, the day before yesterday, I can't remember now, and they were talking about how brokers are marketing multifamily housing, and they're using a little bit of a less traditional marketing tool, and what they're doing is showing how much the current owner has increased rent with lease renewals, and how much they are increasing rent when there is a new tenant taking over a lease, and they're 15 and 20% on average, and that's in the Metroplex. So the cost burden, I think, is getting further and further out of reach. The other thing that I would like to, if we could dig into a little bit, is a lot of the rental assistance programs, and we help close to 4,000 families in Arlington every year with rental assistance, but we help with rent and utilities. And if you look at current leases, what we're finding more and more are so many additional fees, like an $89 tech package, and these are mandatory fees. You're paying your utilities, so you're paying for trash, but you also have a valet trash fee. You have a package delivery fee. You've got a common area maintenance fee, and it's on and on and on, where we're seeing several $100s in mandatory fees that are not covered by the rental assistance programs that we have out there today that are provided by HUD or other agencies. So those are things I think are really spiraling kind of out of control. Yesterday in Arlington during the city council meeting, we had a zoning request to convert commercial vacant land, which is getting very, very scarce in Arlington, to multifamily. And we traditionally see a lot of opposition with the community and with our council members in converting vacant, developable commercial land into multifamily. Um, and that's exactly what this was. And they had person after person after person from the community come down and say things like, my daughter just graduated from college and I want her to stay in Arlington, and she wants to stay in Arlington, but she can't because she can't afford, with a college degree, to live in Arlington. So I think our community is waking up to a lot of these challenges, but it's just, it's going to impact wages. It's going to impact the cost of services. It's just kind of very much a spiral.
You're absolutely right. And thank you so much for sharing everything about that. As Tarrant County Public Health, we know firsthand just how important mobility is in terms of healthcare, and it all starts with housing. There are people who couldn't leave their homes during COVID to get a COVID test or to get a COVID vaccine, and they just had to wait and hope and pray that someone was going to come to them. So you're absolutely right. It is so important to consider what goes into making housing like healthcare outcomes as well.
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to connect. We worked really closely with the Arlington Fire Department through housing, because of the population that we serve, to survey our clients and say who is not able to get a vaccine, who is not able to get tested, so that we could direct services to those who either were homebound or by choice were homebound because they were afraid to go out because of significant health concerns. Another thing that we've done over time is when we bring in large groups of families to add them to our rental assistance programs, we for a long time, this of course is pre-COVID, we had JPS here on site. So when people are here filling out their paperwork and waiting for their appointment, they were getting enrolled in JPS Connect at the same time, because again, the overlap between the eligibility for the two programs was pretty consistent. So I think those are things that we have done and we can do more of, working together, looking at this more as a common goal versus a health issue or a housing issue, but more of a sort of a combined issue. Anyway, that's all. Sorry.
No, that was excellent. Please do not apologize. We greatly value your input, and that's what we're here for. This Tarrant County equity plan that we're going to create is for the county. I know the city of Arlington and the city of Fort Worth both have their own equity plans and recommendations, but it's time that we all work together and start making sustainable and long-term policy to fix the ramifications of what people before us have caused a lot through this discriminatory legislature and racism. Okay, last question. Is there anything you'd like to add about housing inequities up to this point in time? Perfect. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. If you think of anything, please drop it in the chat or unmute yourself.
I do have a question that you mentioned during your presentation about the inequities of home ownerships. Can you state that quote again? I think it was blacks with degrees are less likely to have home ownership than whites without high school.
Yes, you are correct.
It's
So
without.
education, yes, without. So African American households that do have at least one bachelor's degree are less likely to own a home than white households without a high school diploma.
Was that in DFW or was that nation when you
That is
said that?
nationwide. Yes, it's nationwide. That data is from, let me go find it real fast. It's from the Urban Institute. So if you're ever interested, the Urban Institute has really wonderful national data and really great options for solutions for some of these 5 driving variables. So the low median household income, educational attainment, low credit score, marital status, and age distribution.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great question. Okay, we'll move on and touch a little bit on planning and engagement, and this is really where our work is going to be concentrated moving forward. This meeting today is mostly just to get some background and kind of gauge what's most important to y'all so that we can start actually doing the work in the next few meetings. So there's 2 main things that this committee will do. One is create a housing equity plan that'll be part of our greater Tarrant County equity plan, and we're going to engage the community. So we're going to take a look at some of the housing sections in the King County Equity and Social Justice Plan, as well as we're not going to do the Arlington one this time, but we will next time. And we'll start brainstorming our preferred methods of community engagement as well. Again, this is just brainstorming. We're not going to be married to anything today. So pictured here is the housing component of the King County Equity and Social Justice Plan. After reviewing several other plans, this plan and the Arlington Unity Council plan will most closely relate to the product that we are trying to achieve as Tarrant County. King County, which is located in Washington, I believe, near Seattle, focuses on policy and sustainable change and has prioritized 5 methods of policies that you can see here. The first is to target resources. Next is to seek innovative partnerships and housing models, increase housing funding and housing stability, and analyze housing and population trends to address changing housing needs. So while this is only, again, a very brief overview of the King County housing portion, I wanted to introduce you all to our goal deliverable. It'll be this committee that determines the key policy areas, and it'll be this committee who works with the community to create sustainable long-term housing solutions. I would highly recommend browsing the King County and Arlington Unity Council plans. They are wonderful resources to our future work in this committee, and we'll be referring back to them a lot. So if you're not familiar with them now, you will be in a few months once we do a deep dive into the materials that they've put together. Tanya has provided both links in the chat. So please feel free to click on those now, but I will also be sending them out in our minutes email. We're going to quickly touch on community engagement. So we're not necessarily going to be using this tool, but I do really like the questions that it poses. This is the Community Engagement Planning Canvas, which was developed by the Tamarack Institute. This tool helps to explore the critical considerations of an engagement process, which allows for the sharing of key information to be contained in one single place for discussion and refinement. In the planning process, it's imperative that we begin the development of engagement goals, and that those goals are referenced throughout the planning process to ensure that all of our activities and our deliverables are actually meeting our outlined objectives. So as you can see, there's 5 working parts that answer 5 very simple questions, but also very important questions. Why are we engaging the community? How are we engaging the community? Who are we engaging? What resources are required to engage the community, and how will we evaluate the level of engagement? So these are the questions that we'll dive deeper into in future meetings. As of right now, feel free, if there's anything that stands out to you about this tool or the questions that it poses, please unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. Or if you think there's additional questions that we should be asking outside of these 5. All right, we'll go ahead and move on then. So before we open up the floor completely, I have a few final pieces of information and upcoming events. The Housing Committee's next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, May 11th from 2 to 3 p.m. It is a recurring calendar invite, so it should already be on your calendars, but if it's not, or you'd like for me to add somebody to it, please let me know and I can resend or forward the meeting along. We'll meet the second Wednesday of every month going forward. I'm also the Economic Development Committee lead, so if you're interested in participating in that committee, please let me know. The 2 issues can sometimes be one and the same, so I've found that some of the people who are in here now have also expressed interest in that committee. We may combine them in the future, not totally sure yet, but if you're interested in economic development as well, please let me know. That first committee meeting will take place sometime in May. A date has not been set yet. Next up, we have some April trainings that are still going on. This is just a friendly reminder that there are 3 workshops scheduled through the remainder of this month that are free for you and up to 5 members of your organization to attend. All workshops are virtual and will be recorded, and these recordings, as well as all the materials, will be distributed following the live sessions. So please feel free to watch them at your leisure or jump in, when they're actually happening, and share them with whomever you feel may benefit. The upcoming workshop dates and times, I'm going to list them off real fast, but I will also include this information in a follow-up email. This upcoming Monday, April 18th from 1 to 3 p.m. It'll be talking about operationalizing health equity, and that one's a 2-part series, so this one will be part 2. On Friday, April 22nd from 9 to 11 a.m., it'll be part 1, measuring, monitoring, and managing health equity. And then on Monday, April 25th from 1 to 3, it'll be part 2, measuring, monitoring, and managing health equity. If you're not already receiving email reminders about these workshops and you would like to, please let us know in the chat, and we'll make sure to get you added to that email list, especially since the next one is coming up pretty quick. Additionally, if you're interested in participating in any other committees, their upcoming meeting dates are going to be as follows. So the Communication Committee is meeting on Monday, April 18th from 10 to 11 a.m. The Health Committee is meeting on Wednesday, April 23rd from 2 to 3 p.m. And the Transportation Committee, their first meeting is not until May, but it'll be May 23rd from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys. Please feel free to ask any questions, provide feedback, or offer any additional perspectives.
I just want to say thank you. You did an amazing job. That's a ton of hard stuff, and you covered it in a really awesome way. So thank you very much.
I can
Thanks,
second
Maggie.
that. I can second that as well, and I would love to be able to get that the taping of this. For some of the data that you mentioned was wonderful. I was just trying to write as much as I could.
Absolutely. You'll get all of this as well as a recording. Fun fact, I mean, you see that it's recording now, but we're going to be putting all of our general meetings and committee meetings on YouTube. We're in the process of creating the final version, I guess, of our TCUC page on the Tarrant County Public Health website. So everything, including agendas, minutes, and recordings, will be there. But I will also send you guys some of the raw data and slides if you'd like them. Just let me know. This is, of course, the first meeting, so whatever you guys would prefer, we can make it happen. Data always please. Yes, you got it, Maggie. Anything else before we close out? All right, well, with that, our first Tarrant County Unity Council Housing meeting is in the books. Woohoo! Thank you all so much for your participation and for your time, and hopefully we'll see you on May 11th at 2 o'clock for the next meeting. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week.